Every civilization that ever existed tried to bury this. Not because it was dangerous, not because it was wrong, because it was too right. And people, when they hear something that is too accurate, too close to the bone, they do not spread it. They silence it. They call it dark. They call it forbidden. And then they go back to their comfortable story. Here is what I want you to hold in the back of your mind for the next 10 minutes. The knowledge that was supposedly forbidden was never locked in a vault. It was never whispered only to kings. It was available to anyone willing to sit with the discomfort of actually hearing it. The reason it feels forbidden is not because it was hidden. It is because we keep hiding from it. By the end of this video, you are going to understand exactly what that knowledge is, and more importantly, why your brain is specifically wired to avoid it. Stay with me. Ancient libraries were not just repositories of information. They were filters. The texts that survived, the ones that got copied by hand, generation after generation at enormous cost, survived for a reason. Scribes did not copy things that were useless. They copied things that were urgent. And the texts that kept showing up across cultures that had never even spoken to each other were not maps to treasure. They were not instructions for power. They were documents about one thing: how to face reality directly, without flinching. The Stoics in Rome, the Buddhist philosophers in India, the Taoist sages in China, they were not writing the same book by coincidence. They were all staring at the same uncomfortable thing and trying to describe it honestly. Now here's where things get interesting, because what they were all pointing at was not some cosmic mystery. It was something sitting inside you right now. There is a concept in psychology called motivated reasoning, and the word motivated here is important. It does not mean you are reasoning thoughtfully toward a goal. It means your brain is working backward. It starts with the conclusion it wants to reach and finds evidence to support it. This is not a character flaw. It is a survival mechanism. For most of human history, radical uncertainty was a death sentence. The people who could override doubt with confidence, who could convince themselves that the next hunt would work, that the tribe would survive, that things would be okay, those people took action. Doubt froze people. Confidence moved them. But that same wiring, which served your ancestors incredibly well, is now the thing that makes certain truths feel physically uncomfortable to sit with. Your brain does not say this is uncertain, it says this is dangerous, and dangerous things get avoided. And this is where most people make a mistake, because they assume that the discomfort they feel when confronted with a hard truth is a signal to stop. It is not. It is the signal that they are getting close. So what is the knowledge? What is this thing that ancient philosophers spent entire lifetimes trying to articulate, and that modern human beings spend enormous energy avoiding? It is this: you are responsible for everything inside your own experience and nothing outside of it. Read that again slowly. Not you are responsible for what happens to you. That is not what the Stoics said. That is not what the Buddhist philosophers said. What they said is that the only territory you actually control is the space between what happens and how you respond. Your opinions, your choices, your interpretations, your reactions, those belong to you. Everything else, the weather, other people, circumstances, time, does not. Here is a real-world example. Two people get fired from the same job on the same day. One of them spends the next 6 months telling the story of how they were wronged. The other spends the next 6 months building something new. The external event was identical. The internal response was everything. That is the psychological truth that the ancient world kept returning to. Not because it feels good, because it is accurate. And accurate maps, even uncomfortable ones, help you navigate better than beautiful maps that lie. Now this next part might surprise you, because this is where the forbidden framing actually makes sense. Here is the thing about radical personal responsibility. It is deeply inconvenient for systems that depend on you feeling powerless, not in a conspiracy theory way, in a quiet, structural way. Think about how many industries exist specifically to manage your discomfort rather than eliminate its source. Think about how much political messaging is built around telling you that your problems come from outside yourself, from other groups, other policies, other people. Think about how many social dynamics reward victimhood and punish people who refuse to perform it. This is not ancient history. Walk through any comment section. Watch how people respond to someone who says, "I changed my situation by changing my thinking." The backlash is immediate. That is oversimplified. That ignores systemic factors. Not everyone has your privilege. Some of those critiques are fair, but notice the emotional temperature. Notice how quickly the response turns hostile. Because somewhere underneath the argument, something in people knows that if radical responsibility is even partially true, it creates an obligation. And obligations are uncomfortable, so the knowledge gets labeled dangerous. It gets called victim blaming. It gets suppressed, not by kings, not by priests, but by the collective discomfort of people who are not ready to hear it. So why does this matter? Because the degree to which you can hold this truth without either dismissing it or weaponizing it against other people determines how useful it actually becomes to you. Marcus Aurelius was the most powerful man in the known world. He ran an empire of over 70 million people. He commanded armies. He controlled resources that no single person since has ever come close to matching. And the private journal he kept, the one we now call Meditations, is almost entirely about one thing: reminding himself how little of that actually mattered, and how completely he was still responsible for his own inner state. This is not performative humility. Read the actual text. He is not writing for an audience. He is writing to himself in Greek, in the middle of military campaigns, in the margins of dispatch letters. He is working through the same core problem again and again. Events are outside my control. My response is not. Do not confuse the two. What is extraordinary is not that he believed this. It is that the most powerful person alive needed to write it down repeatedly to remind himself not to forget it. Because the pull of blame, the pull of circumstance, the pull of "this happened to me," it does not disappear when you understand the truth. You have to keep choosing the truth. That is the practice. Not a one-time insight, a daily renegotiation. There is a second layer to this forbidden knowledge, and it is the one that makes the first layer make sense. Every philosophical tradition that pointed toward personal responsibility did so against a backdrop of impermanence. The Stoics had a practice called memento mori, remember that you will die. Not as a morbid exercise, as a clarity tool, because when you hold your mortality in view, a very specific thing happens to your priorities. The trivial falls away, the argument you are nursing, the status you are managing, the approval you are chasing from someone who barely thinks about you. When you hold the full weight of your finite life against those things, they dissolve. Not because life is meaningless, but because the contrast clarifies what actually matters. This is uncomfortable to sit within a culture that has engineered mortality almost entirely out of daily life. We do not see death. We do not talk about it. It happens in hospitals, behind closed doors, in hushed language, and as a result, we live with almost no sense of urgency about what we are actually spending our time on. The ancient world did not have that luxury. People died in public, funerals were communal. The fact of death was woven into daily life. And the philosophers who emerged from that world were not pessimists. They were people who had learned to live with radical intentionality, because they could not pretend the clock was not running. Here is where the three threads, responsibility, mortality, and impermanence, collapse into one idea. The thing that makes psychological truths forbidden is not their darkness. It is that they require something from you. They are not passive information. They are obligations disguised as insights. Knowing that you are responsible for your inner experience means you cannot keep outsourcing your unhappiness. Knowing that you will die means you cannot keep postponing your actual life. Knowing that everything changes means you cannot keep holding on to fixed identity, fixed outcomes, fixed expectations of how things were supposed to go. These three truths together form a kind of psychological ecosystem. Each one reinforces the others, and together they point toward a way of living that is genuinely harder than the alternative, but far more real. The person who sits with all three of these ideas long enough stops being reactive. They stop being a victim of circumstances without dismissing circumstances. They stop being obsessed with legacy without becoming indifferent to contribution. They find a middle path that the ancient world had names for: eudaimonia, wu-wei, ataraxia, and that modern psychology is slowly rediscovering under terms like psychological flexibility, acceptance, and cognitive reappraisal. Every few hundred years, this knowledge surfaces with enough force to shift cultures. The Stoics built it into Roman civic life. The Buddhists built it into entire civilizations across Asia. The existentialists of the 20th century dragged it back into Western thought after 2 world wars made comfortable illusions impossible to maintain. And then, each time, it softens. It gets absorbed into the mainstream and loses its edge. It becomes a wall poster. It becomes a productivity hack. It becomes something you pay $40 a month to receive in a meditation app. And the edge, the actual discomfort that makes the knowledge work, gets sanded off. Because that is what markets do. They find a painful truth and sell you a version of it that does not require anything from you. This is not a tragedy. It is just what happens. And knowing it happens is itself useful. Because it means that when you encounter this knowledge in its comfortable form, as a listicle, as an affirmation, as a quote on a t-shirt, you can look past the packaging and find the harder version underneath. The version with teeth. None of what you have just heard is actionable in the way a productivity video is actionable. You cannot schedule a reminder to accept impermanence. You cannot build a morning routine around genuine psychological responsibility. What you can do is practice noticing. When something goes wrong, and something will, notice the first story your brain reaches for. Notice whether that story places the cause somewhere outside you. Not because external factors are not real, they are. But notice whether locating the cause outside you also locates the solution outside you. Because if it does, you have just made yourself helpless in the one domain where you are never helpless. Notice too when you feel the pull to avoid a thought because it is uncomfortable. That pull is information. It is your nervous system flagging something that requires attention. The ancient philosophers were not special because they were smarter. They were special because they trained themselves not to look away when their own minds told them to. That is the practice. That is the forbidden knowledge, not a secret kept by elites, a discipline avoided by almost everyone. You came into this video wondering what was actually being hidden. Here is the honest answer. Nothing was hidden. The hardest truths have always been in plain sight. They just ask something of you that is easier to refuse than to accept. And so most people refuse in 1,000 small ways, every single day. The question the ancient world kept asking, and the question I am leaving you with now, is the same one Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself in the middle of the night, running an empire, knowing he would die. Given everything I know, what am I actually going to do with the time I have? That is not a philosophical question, that is a practical one. And it only has one kind of answer. If this kind of thinking is something you want to go deeper on, the next video on ancient philosophy and modern psychology is sitting right there. Watch that next. I think it will hit differently now. And if this video changed how you are thinking today, a like goes a long way toward getting it in front of people who need to hear it. I will see you in the next one.